Hello, book lovers. Welcome to session 12 of the guided reading of Anne Brontë's Agnes Grey. This is the one session before the last. We're almost at the end of this project. I hope you have been enjoying these sessions, reading this Victorian novel with me. I must say, I'm enjoying it very, very much. And I cannot wait to continue reading with you guys. So, do you have your choice of drink with you? I have some coffee here, still quite hot, so I have to wait a little bit before I can take a sip. And I'm ready to start the day with you, book lovers, and to continue our literary journey with Agnes Grey. But as usual, before we do that, let's recap what we read and discussed in session 11. So, in session 11, we read chapters 20 and 21. Chapter 20 is called The Farewell, and Agnes bids farewell to her family and returns to Horton Lodge for 6 weeks and so to wrap everything up so she can go back and start the boarding school with her mother. And she goes back, but one of I think one of her strongest motivations to go back, in addition to finishing her work, was to see Mr. Weston again. But for weeks, she did not see him. And she was almost giving up when, on the last day, he comes to her after service and says that it is possible that they will meet again. And she's bursting with happiness again. So, a lot of ups and downs in Agnes's and all human beings' lives, right? Ups and downs. And then chapter 21 is called The School. And now Agnes is back and she starts school work, right? She and her mom begin a boarding school for girls. And she's happy. She's happy that she's able to work with her mom, that they are able to provide for themselves. It's a much more loving, welcoming atmosphere than at Horton Lodge. But she's not 100% happy because secretly she hopes to receive a letter or visit from Mr. Weston, but nothing comes for 7 months. And she's wretched. And again, she's almost giving up when then a letter comes. But it's an unexpected letter. It's a letter from Rosalie Ashby, the married Mrs. Ashby, Lady Ashby, asking Agnes to come visit her. So she is going. She has accepted Rosalie's invitation. Yes, she would like to see Rosalie again. She would like to do something different for a change. But also, going to visit Rosalie means that she will be close to Mr. Weston. And could they meet again? That's what we'll see um, as we read the upcoming chapters. Today, we're going to read chapters 22, The Visit, and chapter 23, The Park. And if you are passionate about the Victorian period like I am, there is something you cannot miss. It's a masterclass that I have created and recorded for you, book lover. It is called An Introduction to Victorian Literature. It's a 4-part masterclass, and you can find it on the website booksandculture.club. You can find the masterclass there, and as soon as you register and purchase the course, you have instant access to the classes. I hope you enjoy the lessons. You know by now that the 19th century is my favorite period in the history of English literature. So there's a lot to talk about always, but that is just the beginning. It's an introduction to the Victorian period in literary history, and I hope you enjoy it. So now let's read chapter 22, The Visit. Ashby Park was certainly a very delightful residence. The mansion was stately without, commodious and elegant within. The park was spacious and beautiful, chiefly on account of its magnificent old trees, its stately herd of deer, its broad sheet of water, and the ancient woods that stretched beyond it, for there was no broken ground to give variety to the landscape, and but very little of that undulating swell which adds so greatly to the charm of park scenery. And so, this was the place Rosalie Murray had so longed to call her own, that she must have a share of it on whatever terms it might be offered, whatever price was to be paid for the title of mistress, and whoever was to be her partner in the honor and bliss of such a possession. Well, I am not disposed to censure her now. It is a beautiful place. She received me very kindly, and though I was a poor clergyman's daughter, a governess, and a schoolmistress, she welcomed me with unaffected pleasure to her home, and, what surprised me rather, took some pains to make my visit agreeable. I could see, it is true, that she expected me to be greatly struck with the magnificence that surrounded her, and I confess I was rather annoyed at her evident efforts to reassure me and prevent me from being overwhelmed by so much grandeur. Too much awed at the idea of encountering her husband and mother in law, or too much ashamed of my own humble appearance. I was not ashamed of it at all, for though plain, I had taken good care not to be shabby or mean, and should have been pretty considerably at my ease if my condescending hostess had not taken such manifest pains to make me so. And as for the magnificence that surrounded her, nothing that met my eyes struck me or affected me half so much as her own altered appearance. So she's there, and Rosalie, well, Rosalie has probably felt quite lonely. We'll see. So the presence of a familiar face, as in Agnes, must be very welcoming to her. But at the same time, so she welcomes her with civility and a lot of attention. But at the same time, she wants to make it clear that they come from separate social spheres, right? So she wants to show off her the grandeur of her house, the elegance of her house, and she keeps saying that, pointing that out to Agnes, who couldn't care less. But she's struck at Rosalie's appearance. Whether from the influence of fashionable dissipation or some other evil, a space of little more than 12 months had had the effect that might be expected from as many years in reducing the plumpness of her form, the freshness of her complexion, the vivacity of her movements, and the exuberance of her spirits. I wished to know if she was unhappy, but I felt it was not my province to inquire. I might endeavor to win her confidence, but if she chose to conceal her matrimonial cares from me, I would trouble her with no obtrusive questions. I therefore at first confined myself to a few general inquiries about her health and welfare, and a few commendations on the beauty of the park, and of the little girl that should have been a boy, a small delicate infant of 7 or 8 weeks old, whom its mother seemed to regard with no remarkable degree of interest or affection, though full as much as I expected her to show. So she's much changed, Rosalie. So her body shows that she has been unhappy. She has lost weight. She's not as energetic as before. And she has an 7, 8 week old baby, but she shows not much affection to it, no affection or no interest at all, which we could, in modern uh, terms, maybe diagnose with a postpartum depression, but that's not something they would be um, familiar with at the time. But you can tell that Rosalie is not happy, and perhaps asking Agnes to come is an effort on her part to feel better. Shortly after my arrival, she commissioned her maid to conduct me to my room and see that I had everything I wanted. It was a small, unpretending, but sufficiently comfortable apartment. When I descended thence, having divested myself of all travelling encumbrances, and arranged my toilet with due consideration for the feelings of my lady hostess, she conducted me herself to the room I was to occupy when I chose to be alone, or when she was engaged with visitors, or obliged to be with her mother in law, or otherwise prevented, as she said, from enjoying the pleasure of my society. It was a quiet, tiny little sitting room, and I was not sorry to be provided with such a harbor of refuge. So Agnes is there, but she's supposed to be in a specific part of the house. Comfortable, yes, and Agnes is happy to have that room for herself, but she will not So Agnes, Rosalie will not introduce Agnes to her social life, so to her mother-in-law, to perhaps her husband, to visitors, to friends. No, she is there as a private companion, but because of her social background, so as a governess, the daughter of a clergyman, she's not on the same social standing to be able to be part of Rosalie's social circle. In some time, said she, I will show you the library. I never examine its shelves, but I dare say it is full of wise books, and you may go and borrow among them whenever you please. And now you shall have some tea. It will soon be dinner time, but I thought, as you were accustomed to dine at one, you would perhaps like better to have a cup of tea about this time, and to dine when we lunch. And then, you can have your tea in this room, and that will save you from having to dine with Lady Ashby and Sir Thomas, which would be rather awkward. At least not awkward, but rather. You know what I mean. I thought you mightn't like it so well, especially as we may have other ladies and gentlemen to dine with us occasionally. Certainly, said I. I would much rather have it as you say, and if you have no objection, I should prefer having all my meals in this room. Why so? Because I imagine it will be more agreeable to Lady Ashby and Sir Thomas. Nothing of the kind. At any rate, it will be more agreeable to me. She made some faint objections, but soon conceded, and I could see that the proposal was a considerable relief to her. Agnes can see right through her, right? So she even suggests herself that she should have the meals there in that room. So she does not need to be in the same room as the highly elevated guests. Um, where did we stop? Oh, yes. Now come into the drawing room, said she. There's the dressing bell, but I won't go yet. It's no use dressing when there's no one to see you, and I want to have a little discourse. Now, this is some interesting contextual information. So there's a reference to the dressing bell. Let me tell you what that means here. Mm, the dressing bell. In upper class households, servants rang a dressing bell to announce to family and guests that it was time to dress up for dinner. So when the bell rings, it's time to dress up. But Rosalie said, "Well, we're not going to do it because there's no point in dressing up when there's no one to see you." And they go to the drawing room. And the drawing room, well, if you've read Jane Austen, you have heard of drawing rooms before. But the drawing room is the room where family and guests gathered before dinner and where the women of the house would meet after dinner while the men met in another room to have an after dinner drink and to smoke. So after dinner, men and women would go to separate rooms. Um, the the man would get together to talk about politics, serious matters, and I mean serious in quotation marks, right? Because women could also discuss serious things, although that was not a knowledge at the time. And they would drink and smoke cigars, so activities that would not be considered appropriate for ladies. So the ladies would get together at the drawing room, in the drawing room, and they would talk other things. And I'm sure the men expected the conversation to be very dull and silly, which I doubt. And they would drink tea, not alcohol, or drink some other kinds of beverages that were considered appropriate for women. It was also the room in which the family would greet and entertain guests who paid formal calls. So if you would receive visitors, you would um, welcome them and talk to them and entertain them in the drawing room. So a part of the house that was not as private as, the bedrooms or other rooms that would be shared only by family members. Let's see how the coffee is now. Perfect. Tell me, what do you prefer to drink while you're reading? Coffee or tea? Let me know in the comments below. Coffee or tea? The drawing room was certainly an imposing apartment and very elegantly furnished. But I saw its young mistress glance towards me as we entered, as if to notice how I was impressed by the spectacle, and accordingly I determined to preserve an aspect of stony indifference, as if I saw nothing at all remarkable. Agnes likes to to challenge Rosalie. But this was only for a moment. Immediately conscience whispered, "Why should I disappoint her to save my pride? No, rather let me sacrifice my pride to give her a little innocent gratification." And I honestly looked round and told her it was a noble room and very tastefully furnished. She said little, but I saw she was pleased. She showed me her fat French poodle that lay curled up on a silk cushion, and the two fine Italian paintings, which, however, she would not give me time to examine, but saying I must look at them some other day, insisted upon my admiring the little jeweled watch she had brought from Geneva, and then took me round the room to point out sundry other articles of virtue she had imported from Italy. And articles of virtue uh, means art objects. So art objects that she had brought from Italy. So remember, she was very excited to travel, but consider that she was a young lady who had been confined to her house for most of her life and interacted with pretty much the same people during her whole life. She sees marriage as a way out, as a way to explore the world, something she would not have had the opportunity to do had she married someone from a lower rank. So um, that is, well, we can see that she did not marry for love, not at all, but she was more concerned with having with experiencing certain things such as traveling, living in a big house with a big park, and being able to host social events. So it's a sacrifice she makes in order to be able to experience those things that as a woman at her time, in her time, she would not have been, she would not have had the liberty to do on her own. So an elegant little timepiece and several busts, small graceful figures and vases, all beautifully carved in white marble. She spoke of these with animation, and heard my admiring comments with a smile of pleasure, that soon, however, vanished, and was followed by a melancholy sigh, as if in consideration of the insufficiency of all such baubles to the happiness of the human heart, and their woeful inability to supply its insatiate demands. Then, stretching herself upon a couch, she motioned me to a capacious easy chair that stood opposite. Not before the fire, but before a wide open window, for it was summer, be it remembered, a sweet, warm evening in the latter half of June, and I sat for a moment in silence, enjoying the still, pure air and the delightful prospect of the park that lay before me, rich in verdure and foliage, and basking in yellow sunshine, relieved by the long shadows of declining day. But I must take advantage of this pause. I had inquiries to make, and I like the substance of a lady's postscript. The most important must come last. So I began with asking after Mr. and Mrs. Murray, and Miss Matilda, and the young gentleman. I was told that papa had got the gout, which made him very ferocious, and that he would not give up his choice wines and his substantial dinners and suppers, and had quarrelled with his physician because the latter had dared to say that no medicine could cure him while he lived so freely. That mamma and the rest were well. Matilda was still wild and reckless, but she had got a fashionable governess, and was considerably improved in her manners, and soon to be introduced to the world, and that John and Charles, now at home for the holidays, were by all accounts fine, bold, unruly, mischievous boys. "And how are the other people getting on?" said I. "The Greens, for instance." "Ah, Mr. Green is heartbroken, you know," replied she with a languid smile. "He hasn't got over his disappointment yet, and never will, I suppose. He's doomed to be an old bachelor, and his sisters are doing their best to get married." "And the Melthams?" "Oh, they're jogging on as usual, I suppose. But I know very little about any of them, except Harry. said she, blushing slightly and smiling again. I saw a great deal of him while we were in London, for as soon as he heard we were there, he came up under pretence of visiting his brother, and either followed me like a shadow wherever I went, or met me like a reflection at every turn. But you needn't look so shocked, Miss Grey. I was very discreet, I assure you. But, one can't help being admired. Poor fellow. He was not my only worshipper, but he was certainly the most conspicuous, and I think the most devoted among them all. And that detestable and Sir Thomas chose to take offence at him, or my profuse expenditure, or something, I don't exactly know what, and hurried me down to the country at a moment's notice, where I'm to play the hermit, I suppose, for life. So here there's a hint of what might have happened in London. So remember that Rosalie loves to be admired, right? She still boasts um, um, about, the conquests she's made. So one of her um, admirers follows her to London. That's Mr. Harry Melton. And apparently she saw him quite a lot. Now, we don't know if it was actually Harry who chased her or the other way around, as well, we have some prior knowledge to um, uh, um, Rosalie's, oh my goodness, Rosalie's behavior. Um, and we know that detestable, then she corrects herself. Sir Thomas chose to bring her down. So Sir Thomas, her husband, decided that was not proper. Either that or she was spending too much money and sent her back to the country where she complained she's supposed to play the hermit. And she bit her lip and frowned vindictively upon the fair domain she had once so coveted to call her own. And Mr. Hatfield, said I, what has become of him? Again she brightened up and answered gaily. Oh, he made up to an elderly spinster and married her, not long since, weighing her heavy purse against her faded charms, and expecting to find that solace in gold which was denied him in love. Because she denied him love, right? Well, and I think that's all, except Mr. Weston. What is he doing? So she saved the best, the most important for last. I don't know, I'm sure. He's gone from Horton. How long since, and where is he gone to? Well, I know nothing about him, replied she, yawning, except that he went about a month ago. I never asked where. I would have asked whether it was to a living or merely another curacy, but thought it better not. And the people made a great rout about his leaving, continued she, much to Mr. Hatfield's displeasure, for Hatfield didn't like him, because he had too much influence with the common people, and because he was not sufficiently tractable and submissive to him, and for some other unpardonable sins, I don't know what. But now I positively must go and dress. The second bell will ring directly, and if I come to dinner in this guise, I shall never hear the end of it from Lady Ashby. It's a strange thing one can't be mistress in one's own house. Just ring the bell and I'll send for my maid and tell them to get you some tea. Only think of that intolerable woman. Who? Your maid? No, my mother-in-law, and my unfortunate mistake. Instead of letting her take herself off to some other house, as she offered to do when I married, I was fool enough to ask her to live here still and direct the affairs of the house for me. Because, in the first place, I hoped we should spend the greater part of the year in town, and in the second place, being so young and inexperienced, I was frightened at the idea of having a house full of servants to manage, and dinners to order, and parties to entertain, and all the rest of it, and I thought she might assist me with her experience, never dreaming that she would prove a usurper, a tyrant, an incubus, a spy, and everything else that's detestable. I wish she was dead. She then turned to give her orders to the footman who had been standing bolt upright within the door for the last half minute, and had heard the latter part of her animadversions, and of course made his own reflections upon them, notwithstanding the inflexible wooden countenance he thought proper to preserve in the drawing-room. On my remarking afterwards that he must have heard her, she replied, "Oh, no matter. I never care about the footmen. They're mere automatons. It's nothing to them what their superiors say or do. they won't dare to repeat it. And as to what they think, if they presume to think at all, of course, nobody cares for that. It would be a pretty thing indeed if we were to be tongue-tied by our servants. So saying, she ran off to make her hasty toilet, leaving me to pilot my way back to my sitting room, where in due time I was served with a cup of tea. And after that I sat musing on Lady Ashby's past and present condition, and on what little information I had obtained respecting Mr. Weston, and the small chance there was of ever seeing or hearing anything more of him throughout my quiet, drab-color life, which henceforth seemed to offer no alternative between positive rainy days and days of dull, grey clouds without downfall. At length, however, I began to weary of my thoughts, and to wish I knew where to find the library my hostess had spoken of, and to wonder whether I was to remain there doing nothing till bedtime. As I was not rich enough to possess a watch, could not tell how time was passing, except by observing the slowly lengthening shadows from the window, which presented a side view, including a corner of the park, a clump of trees whose topmost branches had been colonized by an innumerable company of noisy rooks, and a high wall with a massive wooden gate, no doubt communicating with the stable yard, as a broad carriage road swept up to it from the park. So that's something we take for granted, right? We know what time it is all the time. So easy to look around and see what time it is on your computer, on your phone, on a clock on the wall. But imagine not having that luxury that we don't even consider a luxury anymore. So she wouldn't even know what time it is and how much time had passed. So the only way she could have a kind of perspective of how long she had been sitting there was by looking outside and pay attention to the change of the light, sunlight. The shadow of this wall soon took possession of the whole of the ground as far as I could see, forcing the golden sunlight to retreat inch by inch, and at last take refuge in the very tops of the trees. At last, even they were left in shadow, the shadow of the distant hills or of the earth itself. And in sympathy for the busy citizens of the rookery, I regretted to see their habitation, so lately bathed in glorious light, reduced to the sombre workaday hue of the lower world, or of my own world within. Her world is grey, colourless, dark. For a moment, such birds as soared above the rest might still receive the lustre on their wings, which impart to their sable plumage the hue and brilliance of deep red gold. At last that too departed. Twilight came stealing on, the rooks became more quiet, I became more weary, and wished I were going home tomorrow. At length it grew dark, and I was thinking of ringing for a candle and betaking myself to bed. How long she sat there doing nothing, just thinking. She didn't even dare look for the library. I wouldn't be able to do that. I think no one in our age would be able to sit still for so long. So she was considering ringing for a candle when my hostess appeared, with many apologies for having neglected me so long and laying all the blame upon that nasty old woman, as she called her mother-in-law. If I didn't sit with her in the drawing room while Sir Thomas is taking his wine, said she would never forgive me. And then, if I leave the room the instant he comes, as I have done once or twice, it is an unpardonable offense against her dear Thomas. She never showed such disrespect to her husband. And as for affection, wives never think of that nowadays, she supposes, but things were different in her time. As if there was any good to be done by staying in the room when he does nothing but grumble and scold when he's in a bad humor, talk disgusting nonsense when he's in a good one, and go to sleep on the sofa when he's too stupid for either, which is most frequently the case now when he has nothing to do but to sot over his wine. To sot over means to drink excessively. So neither of them is happy, right? You can tell Sir Thomas is drinking a lot and they don't have a good relationship. But they're tied. They're stuck together because social convention was married forever. So divorce was not something accepted. But could you not try to occupy his mind with something better and engage him to give up such habits? I'm sure you have powers of persuasion and qualifications for amusing a gentleman, which many ladies would be glad to possess. And so you think I would lay myself out for his amusement? No, that's not my idea of a wife. It's the husband's part to please the wife, not hers to please him. And if he isn't satisfied with her as she is, and thankful to possess her too, he isn't worthy of her. That's all. And as for persuasion, I assure you I shan't trouble myself with that. I've enough to do to bear with him as he is, without attempting to work a reform. But I'm sorry I left you so long alone. Miss Grey, how have you passed the time? So she's quite um uh how can I describe Rosalie? Well, rebellious in a sense, avant-garde. She does not accept that role of a submissive wife that needs to please the husband, which is quite interesting, right? So she challenges the assumptions of her time. So what has she done, Miss Grey? Chiefly in watching the rooks. Mercy, how dull you must have been. I really must show you the library, and you must ring for everything you want, just as you would in an inn, and make yourself comfortable. I have selfish reasons for wishing to make you happy, because I want you to stay with me, and not fulfill your horrid threat of running away in a day or two. Well, don't let me keep you out of the drawing room any longer tonight, for at present I am tired and wish to go to bed. Well, that's the first day at the park while she drank a cup of tea and sat watching the rooks. That's all. Well, let's see what happens in the next chapter, chapter 23. But before, another sip of coffee. All right. I came down a little before 8 next morning, as I knew by the striking of a distant clock. So then you realize the importance of church bells for announcing the time, right? Not many people would have access to watches at home or clocks at home. So the church bells would announce the time so anyone could know what time it was. So she knew by the striking of a distant clock that it was before 8. There was no appearance of breakfast. I waited above an hour before it came, still vainly longing for access to the library, and after that lonely repast was concluded, I waited again about an hour and a half in great suspense and discomfort, uncertain what to do. That's a terrible feeling when you're in a stranger's house, in a strange person's house, and you don't feel confident, comfortable at home to do anything, and you don't know what to do next, and you're either hungry or you're tired or you would like to do something, anything, and you just can't. I know it's very uncomfortable. At length Lady Ashby came to bid me good morning. She informed me she had only just breakfasted and now wanted me to take an early walk with her in the park. She asked how long I had been up, and on receiving my answer expressed the deepest regret and again promised to show me the library. Just show her the library already so she knows it, and Agnes could also ask for it. I suggested she had better do so at once, and then there would be no further trouble either with remembering or forgetting. She complied on condition that I would not think of reading or bothering me with the books now, for she wanted to show me the gardens and take a walk in the park with me before it became too hot for enjoyment, which indeed was nearly the case already. Of course, I readily assented, and we took our walk accordingly. As we were strolling in the park, talking of what my companion had seen and heard during her traveling experience, a gentleman on horseback rode up and passed us. As he turned in passing and stared me full in the face, I had a good opportunity of seeing what he was like. He was tall, thin, and wasted, with a slight stoop in the shoulders, a pale face, but somewhat blotchy and disagreeably red about the eyelids, plain features, and a general appearance of languor and flatness, relieved by a sinister expression about the mouth and the dull, soulless eyes. I detest that man, whispered Lady Ashby with bitter emphasis as he slowly trotted by. Who is it? I asked, unwilling to suppose that she should so speak of her husband. Sir Thomas Ashby, she replied with dreary composure. It was indeed her husband. And do you detest him, Miss Murray? Said I, for I was too shocked to remember her name at the moment. Yes, I do, Miss Grey, and despise him too. If you knew him, you would not blame me. But you knew what he was before you married him. No, I only thought so. I did not half know him really. I know you warned me against it, and I wish I had listened to you. But it's too late to regret that now. And besides, Mamma ought to have known better than either of us, and she never said anything against it. Quite the contrary. And then I thought he adored me, and would let me have my own way. He did pretend to do so at first, but now he does not care a bit about me. But I should not care for that. He might do as he pleased, if I might only be free to amuse myself and to stay in London, or have a few friends down here. But he will do as he pleases, and I must be a prisoner and a slave. The moment he saw I could enjoy myself without him, and that others knew my value better than himself, the selfish wretch began to accuse me of coquetry and extravagance, and to abuse Harry Meltham, whose shoes he was not worthy to clean. And then he must needs have me down in the country to lead the life of a nun, lest I should dishonor him or bring him to ruin, as if he had not been 10 times worse every way. With his betting book and his gaming table, and his opera girls, and his Lady this and Mrs. that. Yes, and his bottles of wine, and glasses of brandy and water too. Filthy beast! Oh, I would give 10,000 worlds to be Miss Murray again. It is too bad to feel life, health, and beauty wasting away, unfelt and unenjoyed, for such a brute as that, exclaimed she, fairly bursting into tears in the bitterness of her vexation. Of course, she had it coming, but still, it hurts to read that, right? Many, many women suffered as she did. Of course, I pitied her exceedingly, as well as for her false idea of happiness and disregard of duty, as for the wretched partner with whom her fate was linked. I said what I could to comfort her, and offered such counsels as I thought she most required, advising her first by gentle reasoning, by kindness, example, and persuasion, to try to ameliorate her husband. And then, when she had done all she could, if she still found him incorrigible, to endeavor to abstract herself from him, to wrap herself up in her own integrity, and trouble herself as little about him as possible. I exhorted her to seek consolation in doing her duty to God and men, to put her trust in heaven, and solace herself with the care and nurture of her little daughter, assuring her she would be amply rewarded by witnessing its progress in strength and wisdom, and receiving its genuine affection. But I can't devote myself entirely to a child, said she. It may die, which is not at all improbable. Goodness. But with care, many a delicate infant has become a strong man or woman. But it may grow so intolerably like its father, and I shall hate it. So you see why she cannot um, manage to love her child. It's because she sees in the child a possible replication or a possible image of her father, a man she detests. So um, Agnes is trying to change this perspective. That is not likely. It is a little girl and strongly resembles its mother. No matter. I should like it better if it were a boy, only that its father will leave it to inheritance that he can possibly squander away. What pleasure can I have in seeing a girl grow up to eclipse me and enjoy those pleasures that I am forever debarred from? Oh, there's another thing to consider. So it is a girl. So she thinks she's jealous of the girl, of what the girl will be able to experience and what is now lost to her. But supposing I could be so generous as to take delight in this, still it is only a child, and I can center all my hopes in a child. That is only 1 degree better than devoting oneself to a dog. And as for all the wisdom and goodness you have been trying to instill into me, that is all very right and proper, I dare say, and if I were some 20 years older, I might fructify by it. But people must enjoy themselves when they are young, and if others won't let them, why, they must hate them for it. So the thing is that she feels she's losing her youth, unenjoyed, and what was the other word she used? And unfelt. The best way to enjoy yourself is to do what is right and hate nobody. The end of religion is not to teach us how to die, but how to live. And the earlier you become wise and good, the more of happiness you secure. And now, Lady Ashby, I have one more piece of advice to offer you, which is that you would not make an enemy of your mother in law. Don't get into the way of holding her at arm's length and regarding her with jealous distrust. I never saw her, but I have heard good as well as evil respecting her, and I imagine that, though cold and haughty in her general demeanour, and even exacting in her requirements, she has strong affections for those who can reach them. And though so blindly attached to her son, she is not without good principles, or incapable of hearing reason. And if you would but conciliate her a little, and adopt a friendly, open manner, and even confide your grievances to her, real grievances, such as you have a right to complain of, it is my firm belief that she would, in time, become your faithful friend and a comfort and support to you instead of the incubus you describe her. But I fear my advice had little effect upon the unfortunate young lady, and finding I could render myself so little serviceable, my residence at Ashby Park became doubly painful. But still I must stay out that day and the following one, as I had promised to do so. Though resisting all entreaties and inducements to prolong my visit further, I insisted upon departing the next morning, affirming that my mother would be lonely without me, and that she impatiently expected my return. Nevertheless, it was with a heavy heart that I bade adieu to poor Lady Ashby, and left her in her princely home. It was no slight additional proof of her unhappiness that she should so cling to the consolation of my presence, and earnestly desire the company of one whose general tastes and ideas were so little congenial to her own, whom she had completely forgotten in her hours of prosperity, and whose presence would be rather a nuisance than a pleasure if she could but have her heart's desire. And that's the end of chapter 3. So her stay at the Ashbys has come to an end, and no sight of Mr. Weston. In fact, he has left Horton Lodge. She has no idea where he is, and she doubts they will ever see each other again. This part of the novel is quite interesting. It's a confirmation of what we already expected as readers, that Rosalie as Lady Ashby would be unhappy, but to witness it is quite moving. Although she's not a character that we may like, still seeing her suffer moves us, right? At least moves me a bit. Um, and she tried to give her to give counsel, to give comfort, but it would not be accepted, and she felt that her presence there was not really useful, except for being um, yeah, the only thing that Rosalie could get. If she had any other choice, she would not have chosen Agnes. So she doesn't feel like it's worth her time to stay there, and she returns to her mother and to her work at school. So next week is our final session. This narrative is coming to an end. I wonder if they will ever see each other again, Agnes and Mr. Weston. Chapter 24 is called The Sense, and chapter 25, Conclusion. So we'll read the conclusion of this tale next week. I hope you've enjoyed today's session, and let me know in the comments what your reading experience of Agnes Grey has been so far, and also reply to my earlier question: what do you prefer to drink when you're reading, coffee or tea? I'm curious to know. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you in our next session.